When I was 10 years old, while waiting in a parked car, a man got in and tried to drive away. Reddit, what was your scariest childhood memory? I was 7 years old. It was a Saturday morning during the dog days of summer. My mom took my siblings and myself out to eat with our grandparents. After the meal, we decided we'd reconvene at their house to visit a bit more. Being a young kid, riding with your grandparents was way more exciting. So I hopped in their car. It was nice out, so I rolled down the window and stuck my head out like a dog. We pull into their driveway after some time. TL. Grandpa almost killed me with a power window. Holy crap. Same thing happened to me, but it was my little brother who accidentally rolled it up. I was leaning out to look at a dead bird and suddenly I was close to death. You and I are lucky to have made it out alive. That story reminds me of the time I walked back to my parked car. I opened the door and sat down. Then I looked over to see a woman in the passenger seat staring at me with eyes filled with fear. Only then did I realize this was not my car. When I found my neighbor lying dead beside his back door, nothing suspicious or anything, he was just a very sick man. It did freak me out a lot though. I was about 9 at the time. A couple in a blue car tried to abduct me while I was playing on the sidewalk outside my house. I was 5. They kept telling me how good I looked, that they would take me to a water park and introduce me to their new puppy. When I made it clear I had no intention of going with them, the woman freaked out and started screaming at me to get into the car. Later my mom told me to stay with Gracie, my friend, at school the next day because there were people in a light blue sedan creeping around the schools in the area. My father was going to get cash from an ATM and left me in his truck with my baby brother. I think I was 3. He told me not to touch anything while he walked maybe 3 feet away. So, of course, I knocked the stick out of gear. He had parked on an incline and the truck starts rolling backwards where it will go right out into traffic. He turns around, sees the truck, and runs back to us. My dad's a big man, and he's a prison guard if that tells you anything. He puts his hands on the truck and almost stops it from rolling. He has both hands on the side, though, so he can't open the door, so he's screaming at me to do something. Unfortunately, I'm terrified and absolutely useless. Another guy hears my dad yelling and runs over to help muscle the truck still, giving my dad the opportunity to get in and hit the brake. I don't remember anything after that. I probably cried. I dang sure didn't touch anything in the truck again. If I was to park on a hill with young kids in the car, I would have used a parking brake. When I was 10, my family was installing a deck on our 2nd floor. I was running around the house playing tag with my sister and we took that crap seriously. It was like Parker. Anyway, I am chasing my sister towards the door they installed for the deck. She opens the door to run. Big mistake. There is no deck. I watched my sister fall 2 stories, hit her back on the diving board and land in the pool. She ended up with a bruise across her back and a chipped tooth, but it could have been so much worse. I was really young, probably like 3 or 4, but I remember it pretty well. I had been sick and found out about the existence of children's Tylenol, so I climbed up to the top cupboard and ate the entire pack. I was rushed to the hospital and they had to shove a tube down my throat because I wouldn't drink this charcoal stuff. The whole time I was kicking and screaming, not understanding why I was being held down. After the whole ordeal was done, I was offered an orange popsicle from a nurse. I was pee and didn't take it. I regretted it the minute she walked away. One time when I was in 5th grade, I was walking home like usual and then some truck pulled up next to me. It was some bald guy who just kept smiling when I would glance back at him. So I started walking faster and faster until I heard him say, "Hey, do you want a ride?" At this point he got off his truck and started coming towards me, so I ran like frick down the road. I ran until I couldn't see him anymore and ran to a random house, opened the door, and ran to a couch right next to the door and dug my face in the cushions. About 10 minutes passed, so I decided to poke my head out to see where the frick I was. There was a man and a woman just staring at me like if I was robbing their house or something. Then I walked out and went home without saying a word. It was pretty cool. My mom was putting me to bed when I was about 5. As she turned off the light and closed the door, she said to me, "Watch out for the man in your closet." I sprang out of bed to open the door and she was holding the handle from the other side. To this day she thinks it is hilarious. I was 8 and vacationing in China with my parents. Apparently, I don't remember this, in a crowded train station, we were walking and some man grabbed my hand and tried to lead me away. I wasn't paying attention and I thought he was my dad. Fortunately, my dad saw and beat the ever-living frick out of that guy. Go dad. Relevant story. I was 7 years old and in Tenerife on holiday. Some random dude in this marketplace starts stroking my sister's, 5-ish at the time, face and calling her princess. Without missing a beat, my dad turned round, punched the guy in the face, took my sister's hand and carried on walking. I lived in San Diego for a few years in the mid-90s. I was around 12 years old. I was homeschooled for my 8th grade year by my mom. I was bullied so hard in 7th. Being homeschooled, I got to sleep in late. One morning, my mom is driving my older sis to high school, but leaves me asleep at home. What wakes me up was someone pounding on the garage door, then the front door, and then ringing the doorbell. To this day, I have no idea why I freaked the frick out, but being awakened by malicious door beating probably had something to do with it. I called out for my mom or sis, but being still half asleep, 12 years old, and freaked out, I never fricking thought that it was my mom who had accidentally locked herself out of the house on her way out the door to drop off my sis. She did. I called 911. I hid away from the windows and huddled next to the kitchen cabinets. My mom, in the meantime, is frantically pounding on the door, running around the side of the house to try the other doors, the patio door, anything. She thinks there is something seriously wrong with me, like sick or dead, for me not to go open a door or at least respond to the racket she was making. I gained enough courage through my crying to crawl around the kitchen and poke my head out to see out the back windows. With only about less than a minute before the cops come up, 2 had jumped the side fence and were about to storm the house. I screamed at the operator. I was on the phone with 911 the whole time, that the person the cops might see outside in the backyard was my mom and please don't attack or arrest her. After that morning, I was forbidden, for at least 3 years, from sleeping in. She made me get up before leaving the house to drop off my sister. The only thing that she was actually happy about was that in what I perceived as an emergency, I hid and called 911. Poor cops. They got all excited and were like, frick yeah, gonna jump some fences and jump some home intruder, and then they couldn't, Went for ice cream on my bike with my brother when I was 9 and he was 6. We had to bike down kind of a deserted country road in broad daylight, but it was usually pretty safe. I heard a car coming, fast, and told my brother to GTFO of the way, but I wasn't so lucky. The car sideswiped me on the shoulder, totaled my bike and I broke a few bones on my right side. There's no way that person wasn't aiming for me. I haven't ridden a bike since. Who does that? First time I got a boner. Holy crap, was I scared. I seriously thought it would explode or fall off. I ran around screaming for a solid 15 minutes. Good times. When I first started to develop breasts I thought I had cancer or something. I had always thought boobs were just squishy, but the glands and everything are pretty solid. Tumor scare. When I was a kid my parents took me to Nick all the time. I was pretty comfortable there. Being around all those people in such a busy city didn't really faze me. One day I somehow got separated from them and just sort of started looking around for them a bit without getting scared at all. After about 15 minutes though, I started crying my eyes out thinking they left without me. I didn't know anyone. No one would even look at me, and I just felt so alone and suddenly overwhelmed by my surroundings. This woman came over to me and picked me up. She didn't speak any English but spoke to me anyway in a calm, relaxed tone that made me calm down and not be as scared. My parents showed up not long after, in a complete panic. If it wasn't for that woman, I probably would have wandered even farther and it could have ended up much worse. When I was around 6, my mom was crossing a street, at a crosswalk, with me, and a few kids we babysat, all younger than me, 2 in a stroller. Suddenly this truck came barreling around a curve at least 70 kph and my mom had to shove the stroller ahead of her while quickly grabbing me and the other older kid by the arms and flinging us out of the way. She barely made it away herself. She screamed something like "you freaking lunatic" at the driver and cried when we got home. My mom took great pains in our younger years not to swear in front of us. At the time, for some reason, I wasn't scared and didn't think it was that big a deal since we were all okay, but thinking about it now and how well I remember it, I can't imagine what must have went through my mom's head. I now realize my first sentence has a billion commas, but I'm not changing it because I enjoy talking like William Shatner. TLDR. Ninja mom saves her family and still avoids injury. When I was in kindergarten, I played with my older brother at my parents' dry cleaners every day after school. We would usually just run around the alley out back, and one late afternoon while we were playing, my brother runs to the car across the alley to get his Game Boy. I start to follow him but hesitate when I see a car coming pretty quickly to the right. I had an unusual lack of common sense at the time and thought I can totally make it, so I went for it. When I got halfway through, I tripped at the same time the car screeched to a halt, just barely grazing my shoulder. The lady got out of the car and ran over to see if I was okay. I was fine, just had a slightly bruised shoulder and a scraped knee. She felt bad, so she took me to the Subway next door and bought me a cookie. TLDR. Hit by a car. Got cookies. I came home from school when I was 12 and couldn't find my mom in the house. I was yelling her name and got no response and started to panic. I searched room to room, and when I got to the bathroom I couldn't open the door. It wasn't locked but it was blocked. I ran around to the outside to try and peek in the bathroom window and could vaguely see that my mom was sprawled out on the floor. I banged on the glass like crazy yelling her name, but there wasn't an answer. Luckily, the window wasn't latched and I could pull it up. When I got it open I could see her laying there, unconscious, with a pen and memo pad, and right next to it was a small gun. I freaked out, screaming her name, crying, in hysterics, and managed to wedge myself through the window. Went to her, shook her, etc. With no response. She was breathing really slowly but wouldn't rouse from her state. There was no blood or gunshot wound, but she had obviously passed out from drugs or booze or something. She had a habit of pill popping and alcoholism. I crawled over her and ran to the kitchen to call 911. I went back in to wait with her until help arrived. I tried to read the letter, but it was mostly nonsense, garbled, and terribly difficult to make out the handwriting. I called my grandparents as well, as they live down the street. She was rushed to the hospital. They pumped her stomach, then sent her to a hospital that had an inpatient mental health unit. She lived, but really never got better. But I was pretty much scarred for life, I'm so sorry. I know the only reason I have to live sometimes is so I don't have to subject my family to such an awful experience. My drunk homeless uncle knocked on my door after I hadn't seen him in years. I didn't recognize him, so I just sat there staring at him. He grabbed me and threw me over his shoulder, then he hopped on his bike. I was crying, kicking and screaming until he started laughing and put me down before explaining to me that I shouldn't open the door to strangers and introducing himself to me. I learned my lesson. Laying in the back of a pickup truck with bottles and rocks falling raining down while passing through an angry mob in Panama while my dad headed to the airport so we could get out of the country. Noriega era fun. I was 11 years old. I was in the grocery store with my mum when I was little. She turned her back to grab something and a man ran up, grabbed the cart and started to run off with me. My mum started to scream and everyone stared at him. He kept running but left the cart. He probably did it because you're stupid, Ginger. During a family party, my oldest sister decided it would be a good idea to play pirates in our basement. I had a stick. She had a wedding knife. Ended up getting my left hand sliced up nicely all across the palm. I remember waking halfway up the stairs and seeing the blood dripping all over, and I think I passed out after that. I'm trying to think of what a wedding knife could be and I just keep coming up with Kill Bill. When I was in kindergarten I was waiting for my bus with my older sister, 6ish, and a couple neighborhood boys. Apparently we were being too loud at our corner of the street because this older gentleman proceeded to fly out his front door popping bullets at us in every direction we ran. The very same week my older sister and I decided to walk the block to school. The very first time we were making our way to school, we had another older man try and lure us into his car, telling us about his puppies at home. My sister didn't even let him finish his ramblings before she grabbed my arm and dragged me into a fenced backyard. As luck would have it, the backyard was complete with its very own Doberman. Yay. I believe that dog is the main reason the man peeled off. I don't remember if my mom knew about that. TLDR. Got shot at, then almost got picked up by a pedophile in the same week. You had a smart sister, considering she was only 6. When my brother got his driver's license, he would offer to take me anywhere just for an excuse to drive. So one day he takes me and my friend to the mall. We were both female and 9. Right after we get there, he goes to some store, and my friend and I are wandering around having fun. We were leaning over the railing that looked down to the bottom floor when we notice this man, who had to be late 40s early 50s, leaning over the railing, only he's not looking down, he's looking at us. We, being 9, start giggling because it was weird. Then the guy starts making the kissy face at us and starts making the 2-fingered tea licking gesture. If this has a name, please clue me in. We obviously have no clue what this means at the time, but it was enough to freak us the frick out. So we do the fast walk thing out of there to find my brother. The guy follows. Coincidentally, my brother, who at this age, 16, was already 6 feet and 200 lbs, was in the closest store to where this was happening. The guy sees us talking to my brother and stops and turns immediately to walk away. We tell him what the guy is doing. My brother confronts him, and then more security shows up really quickly after. Then the police come. My friend and I had to hit the guy, and when the police looked in his van, a van, they found a bunch of child pee in it. They arrested the guy, and I have no clue what happened after that. Scared my friend and I, but I think it scared my brother worse. It's a good thing it didn't get physical with your brother. 16-year-old kid, even if he's big, should not tangle with a grown crazy man. When I was little, I was sitting in my mom's car while she ran in somewhere. Suddenly, the car just started rolling backwards. I freaked out and tried to put it in park and went as far as to lean over the center console to press the brake with my hands when I realized it was the car beside us pulling forward. I was scared to death and then felt stupid. I also still freak out when this mind frick happens. The scariest part of my childhood was being in my basement when the power went out, and my family forgot about me. I was stuck down there for an hour screaming. When I was 9 or 10, my best friend lived across the street from me, and behind his house was several square miles of woods. One day we were running around in the woods, exploring or whatever, and we stumble upon this sleeping bag and a bunch of beer cans. Then we look up and see this old shirtless Native American man standing there. He walks towards us and we run away. Turns out this homeless dude had been living in the woods behind my friend's house. Not even that far from his house. Like we could see his house from the little campsite. My friend's parents never believed him, but there was a homeless guy living in their woods for at least half a year. What freaked us out more was one night I was sleeping over at his house during an ice storm, and we saw flashlights shining from my friend's freaking treehouse around midnight. The dude was taking shelter in my friend's treehouse in an ice storm. Probably not as scary as a lot of things here, but we were 9 and 10 and that crap freaked us out. When I was 6 years old, one day I was playing out in my front yard with my little brother and 2 neighbor kids when my neighbor from 3 houses down and across the street came running down the street with her 2-year-old in her arms. She was yelling something, and as she got close I heard, "Get your mom. Please go get her. My mom works in the ER," and something was clearly wrong. The lady was screaming and crying, and I only took one look before I sprinted inside to get my mom. My mom and I ran out and all I saw was a limp 2-year-old and his crying mother before my mom made me and my brother and the neighbor kids go next door to their house. The 2-year-old had looked dead. I was scared. The ambulance came but they couldn't save him either. He choked on a cheese cube. His family moved away soon after. I was 9 and just got off the bus, was walking with a friend on our way back to the apartment complex, and we later parted ways. When I got to my apartment, I noticed the door was wide open, so I figured it was my mom who just wanted to let some fresh air in. I walked in and the place was trashed, TV shattered, torn piles of clothes and jewelry on the floor, glasses and plates broken in the kitchen, our safe was missing, and more. We were robbed and I called my mom. I wasn't exactly frightened, just very confused. Anyone could have still been in there still, but I had the audacity to just walk in. As I look back on it, I try to remind myself just how badly that could have turned out. Fresh air in, not out. If anyone was wondering, no, they never caught the robbers. Same sort of story. Came home from school and the camper in front our house had the door hanging open. I had to walk past it to get to the front door. I was utterly terrified, but I just stood there and listened for a while, and after not hearing anything, peeked my head around the corner. It was trashed but empty. Ran inside and called my dad. When I was 5, my mom took me to an entertainment center, like Chuck E. Cheese, but much larger. While walking around the arcade together, I suddenly had the urge to use the toilet and ran off to do my business alone. Upon exiting the washroom, my mother was nowhere to be seen, and after searching for what seemed like forever, like 5 seconds, I began to cry. Thankfully a nice woman called security and I was escorted to the front, and they set me up on the counter and made a found child announcement. No less than 30 people lined up to see if I was their child, most of whom saw me and walked away disappointed, but more than one stranger tried to claim me as their own. And when my mother finally made it to the front, I was clutching the shirt of the teenage boy who worked there, frantically screaming "They're not Mama," while an older couple, both missing teeth, were trying to assure him I was in fact their daughter. As soon as I saw my mother, I jumped off the counter and ran to her and clung to her like a koala to a tree. Holy freaking frick. That old couple is frick. I think I was around 4 or 5 at the time. I was at a pool with my dad outside our apartment complex. He dives a lot, so he would just lay down at the bottom of the pool for around 2 minutes before he had to come up for air. My stepbrother had just shown me how you can suck air off of the ladder going into the pool. Dumbass me gets between the ladder and the wall wanting to try it out. Obviously, I get stuck. I started freaking out because I knew how long my dad could stay down and he wouldn't see me. He was on his stomach looking down. I don't remember how long I was there, but he looked up and saw I was stuck and helped me out. Still freaks me out now. I was traumatized at the time. My aunt said she thought I'd never be the same, but I'll laugh now. When I was 4, my uncle convinced me he could pop his eye out if he wanted. I didn't believe him, of course, so he hits the back of his head and pops out his eye into his hand. I was still doubtful, but a little unsure now. So he said, "Try and open my eye if you don't believe me." My 4-year-old self couldn't pry his eyelids apart. I was still adamant that you couldn't just pop your eye out though, and told him he was lying. He said, "Alright then, I'll just eat it," and proceeds to bite right into it, squirting blood all over. I let out such a scream my family came running thinking that I was dying. I was crying so hard just yelling, "Mark ate his eyeball." He ate it. It was a dang gumball made to look like an eye and it had a red liquid center. TLDR. Mark ate his goddamn eyeball. I'm going to hazard a guess that you're white because it's only ever white people I see calling their aunts and uncles by their name. So, my dad is blind, and he's an alcoholic. My parents split up when I was 3, but my dad got visitation rights for Saturdays. Over summer he'd take me to a pool by his house. I'm a short woman, and I was also a short little girl, and my 4-year-old self was barely touching toes in 3 feet. So I had this awesome pink noodle. I freaking loved that pink noodle. I'm swimming and playing and suddenly, I lose grip on the noodle and it floats off a bit. I run after it. It floats off more. This goes on until suddenly, I realize I can't touch, and I panic. Start flailing. Can't breath enough to yell help. Haven't learned to swim, and the one guy who should have been guaranteed to be paying attention was both drunk and blind. I knew, in that moment, that I was fricked. I believed with no doubt that if I did not push myself to a wall I would die, so I tried to calm down and got myself to a wall. This probably all happened in less than a few minutes, but it felt like ages. The blind alcoholic father was a main player in many of my scared child stories, but I like this one because it's not his fault as much as the others. I'm fairly certain I was almost devoured by blue jays as a 3-year-old. Those things are freaking huge to a 3-year-old. The time I slipped in a friend's pool without my floaty and nearly drowned. My 7-year-old friends just stood their mouths agape as I floundered in the water. I tried signaling to the parents but they were not paying attention. Finally, one of my friends had the common sense to get an adult. Maybe I would have drowned if someone hadn't gone for help when they did. Another floaty story, I wanted to see if I could walk on water by putting them on my feet. Thank goodness there were family members around to get me out of that predicament. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. My scariest childhood memory was when 10-year-old me went to the carnival. Sure enough, the Ferris wheel malfunctioned, and as I was holding the door to my swinging basket, it flung open, taking me with it. All of the doors opened, and because I was gripping so hard, I was dangling high enough to fall to my death if I let go. Luckily my aunt grabbed my shirt and pulled me back into the cart, where I soiled my pants. Ultimately the scariest experience ever. I will never be allowing my daughter to ride a Ferris wheel, ever. When I was 10, I went swimming and a teenager jumped in the pool and held my head underwater until I almost passed out. When I came up gasping for air, doesn't help that I'm asthmatic, he just swam away and laughed with his friends. He probably went on to become a terrible adult. When I was 8-9, I lived in Honduras. My mom and I were walking through the bus station, me wearing a brand new cap. While walking, I felt someone touching me on the head and I was thinking it was a friend of my mom's or something playing a prank, when I feel the hat flying off my head into the hands of some middle-aged man. Mid-air I managed to grab it and was in a tug of war with this freaking thief trying to steal my hat while my mom was screaming to let it go. This was in broad daylight and a bunch of people were just there gawking, watching this scrawny little kid fighting for his hat. After a few seconds the guy let go and ran away and my mom pulled us into the bus. I was terrified, but holy crap, to this day I pat myself on the back for having the balls to hold onto that hat. Who the frick steals hats from 8-year-olds? At the age of 6, I was a really weak swimmer. I was at Daytona Beach in Florida and I was in the water with my sister. A big wave came and swept me out to sea. I got caught in a really strong rip tide. Luckily I had a life jacket on, otherwise I would have drowned probably. My parents even had a hard time getting out to me to save me. Yeah, the riptides are pretty sick on the east coast of Florida. Couple of weeks ago I saw a shark at New Smyrna and when I tried to swim in away from it, I realized I was at the start of a rip current. Luckily, my adrenaline allowed me to GTFO over there. When I was about 13 I was going trick-or-treating on Halloween with a friend of mine in her neighborhood. It was later at night and most of the house lights had been turned off. She had told me of a house that was all decked out with crazy decorations like bodies in the yard and creepy lights and music. The whole nine. I still wanted to see it, so we wandered around a bit on the empty streets looking for it. When we finally found the house we saw it was all turned off. Disappointed we walked a few houses down and saw a house with the lights still on, so we decided to get some more candy. We knocked on the door and an old fat man answered. We said trick or treat and he asked if we'd seen the house down the road. I said we wanted to, but it was turned off. Then he grabbed my wrist with his hand and said let's go wake him up. My friend followed as he pulled me across the road towards the house. He knocked until someone answered. A tall man with an Irish accent answered and recognized the old man. They exchanged hellos and explained that we wanted to see the house. I began to protest, saying we didn't want to disturb anyone, and the Irish man said, oh well, if you guys want to see something you should see the inside. And the old man pushed me and my friend inside the house and shut the door. Once inside, we saw the walls were covered in these sheets that made the walls look like brick walls. There was a little half zombie body that would crawl across the floor with the push of a button, and skeletons and webs. In hindsight it was quite amazing, but I couldn't ignore that we were two young girls in a stranger's scary butt house with two grown men. Then the Irish man said, you guys should see the bathroom, and the old man pushed us into the back of the house. As we walked through the hallway lined with black streamers, I saw an Asian woman push a young boy into a room and lock the door. When we got to the bathroom, it looked straight out of a Saw flick. There was a head hanging from the ceiling on a hook and bloody words written on the mirror and a little TV in the corner playing the tape from The Ring. My friend had been speechless this whole time, and while the men were standing there waiting to hear what we had to say, I kept repeating that we needed to go home. We need to go home over and over again, and digging my fingernails into my friend's hand. Finally I grabbed her and pulled her through the house towards the door. Once I got there I pulled furiously on the door handle. It wouldn't open. Then the old man came up around my shoulder and unlocked the door with a horrifying smile on his face. My friend and ran for 10 blocks until I collapsed and vomited everything in my stomach. I had every bad scenario running through my head that night. Everything that could have happened and what we ran away from. Scary. TL. DR. Me and friend ended up in scary Halloween house with freaky old men and threw up all my candy. Format that crap, man. When my absolute psychopath of an 8-year-old neighbor convinced me when I was 6 that a contract killer was after me. I really do wish I was making this up. I don't think I knew what that was when I was 6 or 8. Dad falling asleep while driving cross country. We drifted across lanes and I wake up to my mom screaming right before we nailed the median. Luckily no one was hurt, and the shock of almost dying kept my dad up the rest of the way. My mom ran into Pizza Hut to pick up dinner. She left me, 10, and my brother, 8, in the car with it running. My brother was in the front and I was in the back. I convinced my brother to put the car in reverse because anarchy. We start rolling backwards and are headed right for this pretty deep drop off with a creek below. We managed to get it stopped at the last second. I thought we were going to die. I don't know what I thought would happen. We survived and the pizza was delicious. I went on to live a menial existence. So I walk to school every day with my friend who lived down the street from me. Well, as I walk out the door, I notice this van slowly rolling up the street, but I don't think anything's wrong. But as I walk down my street and go into my friend's house, I see the van stop on the opposite side of the street as my friend's house. Well, we roll out and reach the bottom of our street and we hear the van rumble to life. We keep walking, thinking the van will go back up our street. As soon as he turned onto the same street we did, we just took off running. We knew this little shortcut and took it so that we would lose him, and we did. We called our parents, they called the cops, and the guy gets brought in. Turns out that he was a mentally retarded homeless guy and he was kicked out of our town. I still think back to it and don't think that he was so innocent. I notice this can rolling slowly. One day when I was maybe 12 I was walking to the fair with 3 of my friends. It was quite a walk and it began to rain halfway through. We were waiting under a tree and a car rolled up with 2 women and offered us a ride. We actually got in the van, and they began driving. The second the door locked I thought, crap, I am done. They ended up just dropping us at the fair and nothing bad happened. I just got really scared for a minute. When I was about 4 years old, I remember waking up out of bed and opening my bedroom door. My bedroom door leads out to the kitchen and dining room. There, in the kitchen I see my father grab my older sister, at the time I suppose she was 15 or 16, by the throat and throw her across the room into cabinets screaming at her. He then grabbed her again by the throat and yelled at her with something along the lines of "shut up." I can't remember too well. I was 4. He then lets go and slaps her as she's already in tears. The next thing I remember is crying in my bed, rocking back and forth in fetal position. This is also my earliest memory. When I was about 7 my dad got home from work and ordered a pizza. He told me when the pizza guy came to give him the cash on the counter, which is what I did. Well, as it turns out my dad had just cashed his check, and I gave the delivery guy a wad of cash that added up to around $700. Luckily he was a nice guy. Came right back up to the door and said, "I think you overtipped me a little," and gave all the cash back. You have been visited by the science doggo. Upvote now and you will get high grades and good results within the next week. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.